I love hiking. There is nothing like getting away from the world, especially these days, and getting lost in nature. Over the years, I've become a pretty decent backpacker and taken on some pretty wild trails. Sometimes I go with my hiking group. I'll spare you our horrible name. Sometimes I went with a friend, but I went alone a lot of times. I know the inherent dangers of solo hiking, and always make sure I take the necessary precautions before my boots hit the dirt. I had been looking for a new place to explore, and came across a post on an online hiking group that said that they had found a beautiful hike that wound through some woods near a little stream, but ended in a breathtaking waterfall. It was a little off the beaten path, the post said, so you would have to hike to the trailhead before you would even get to the trail. Overall, they said it would take about 4 to 5 hours, but it was worth it. You know you're at the trailhead when you see 3 twisted trees. You can't miss them. I cleared my schedule for that Saturday, left the coordinates of where I would be going with a friend, and looked forward to hiking a new spot. If it was good enough, I would suggest it to the group. We had a little friendly competition about finding new trails or unique hikes, and I was super competitive. I had high hopes for this one. The morning of, I packed my bag in with everything that I would need, and some things that I hoped I wouldn't need, and hit the road as the sun was starting to rise. I wanted to get to the waterfall right as it hit the hottest part of the day. My plan was to hit the trail, hike the 5 hours or so. I always assumed the worst case, or so I thought. Head back home and grab a pizza from my favorite spot to help replace the carbs that I had just burned off. It sounded like a beautiful way to spend a Saturday. The post said that you would need to park your car on the side of the road near the H exit. From there, you would have to walk down the embankment, and then it was about a 20-minute hike to the 3 Twisted Pines. I left a note on my dashboard in case anyone found my car or the police were looking to tow it, and I grabbed my pack and I headed for the pines. It was still early, and the sun had just started to peek out. There was a chill in the air, but I didn't mind it. I knew that it would heat up sooner rather than later. Even this early, these songbirds were out and making their presence known. People tend to only think of urban areas as loud, but nature is also a cacophony of sounds. Birds tweet to hopeful partners, brooks babble, bees buzz near their hives, and the wind shakes the trees and rattles the leaves. If you listen, you can hear the groan of the trunk as it sways in the breeze. It is more peaceful than, say, a car alarm, yes, but quiet, absolutely not. The trek to the pines was easy, a slight downhill grade, but nothing too intense. However, the woods around me were thicker than I thought they would be, and I could see how it would be easy to get lost. I had an app on my phone that helped me keep track of where I was, and I'm glad I did. To make matters worse, it had rained the night before, and the trail was a collection of muddy puddles, some more severe than others. I walked in the direction the post said to go, and kept my head on a swivel for the 3 Twisted Pines. I was starting to wonder if I would ever see them or if they even existed. I had a passing thought. What if the post was fake? I asked myself who would do that and why, but any recent online interaction answered that question. Some people are just assholes. But still, that was a pretty reliable place, and I had hiked a dozen trails from recommendations from that site. But as soon as I started to doubt myself, I spied 3 Twisted Pines set away from the rest of the woods. They were a sight to behold in and of itself. Unlike their cousins, who stood tall nearby, these 3 trees were stooped over and gnarled like they had a disease that twisted them into knots. The 3 of them had become intertwined over the years and formed a trellis of sorts, kind of like a doorway in the woods. It looked like a genetic mutation, but there were no other pines nearby that looked like this. It was weird and noteworthy to say the least. I pulled up my phone and I snapped a photo. I couldn't wait to show my hiking group. I put my phone away and walked through the door and started off on the trail. To call it a trail is a bit of a misnomer. Usually, trails were well-worn ruts in the ground, evidence of millions of footfalls on the land. But this trail wasn't so well-worn. There was a lot of grass growing around the slimness of a dirt trail, and oftentimes nature overtook it for a few feet. Maybe the grass had grown in some because of the rain, but it was clear that this wasn't used very often. I was excited about that prospect. The deeper I got into the woods, the bigger the canopies got until, eventually, it was like walking through a natural tunnel of trees. It was relaxing and it kept the hot sun off my back. I tend to skip getting tan and end up smack dab in lobster land when I'm out in the sun, so this was a welcome respite. Despite the foliage overhead, the rain had come through and left the trail a muddy mess. At places where the trail widened some, it was covered with patches of slowly drying mud. In the areas where the sun's rays broke through the canopy, you could see the cracks in the mud as it dried and curled. But in the wet spots, you could actually see footprints of little creatures that ran by and left their mark in the dirt. They were soon joined and dwarfed by my boot print. At about 3 hours in, the trail widened considerably and looked well worn. I had assumed the first part may have been a new path to an older trail, but even this struck me as odd because there were no other smaller trails that led to this big one. It was wide, almost as big as a road, and looked like it had been a large game trail. Since there was no large game around these parts anymore, nor any road access to this area, I wondered how this trail got so big. Undaunted, I kept walking ahead and humming to myself. Even through the shade, I could feel the heat starting to rise. My shirt started clinging to me, and I couldn't wait to be under that waterfall. As I dreamed of cooler situations, something interesting caught my eye. Up ahead, near the brook, the sun was reflecting off of something. At first, I thought it was the water, but as I got closer, I saw that it wasn't. My next thought was trash, or maybe someone lost their keys, but that wasn't it either. It was 4 polished stones. When I say polished, I mean machine polished. The stones were so shiny, it almost hurt to look at it. They were placed in a square pattern on the ground, which I felt was odd. But what really made my heart stop was that there was a place in the middle of the square where something used to be. The dirt around it looked wet, but it wasn't from rain. It was blood. That's when I noticed the whole altar, for lack of a better word, was in front of 3 twisted pines. Again, they formed an arch that looked like a door. Even though I could look right through them and see the water of the stream, something told me not to walk under those trees. I bent down to look at the polished stones. There were some etchings on them, some kind of symbols that I had never seen before. I took a photo, but it came out blurry. In fact, all the pictures I took from that hike came out blurry. I searched for these symbols and never found anything like them yet. Just then, the hair on my neck stood on end. My spidey sense was telling me something terrible was coming, and for the first time in my life, I prayed it was a wild animal stalking me. I heard branches snapping back from the way I came, and I didn't want whatever it was to see me. I made a mad dash to the tree line on the side of the path, and hid behind the biggest tree that I could find. Suddenly, from about the area that I came in at, a figure emerged. The figure was covered from head to toes in a large, flowing green cloak. Their hands were outstretched in front of their chest and held a small box in their palms. From behind him was another figure in a green cloak, only their arms were hanging by their sides. Another figure, then another, and another, All told, there were about 12 of these cloaked figures, in 2 lines, walking a slow procession along the trail. They kept their heads down, and the cloak hood obscured their faces, but I could hear them chanting. I don't know what language it was. I thought maybe Latin, but I've listened to some Latin language online and that's not it. Whatever it was a chant they all knew. It had a weird effect too. I felt, I don't know, dizzy. Maybe it was because my adrenaline was spiking. I don't know, but the whole thing felt off. It's also this moment when I realized that all the other noise in the woods was gone. All I could hear was the chanting. I wanted to run, but I was afraid that these guys weren't just out for a friendly hike, and might cause me some serious harm if they caught me. Whatever the heck this was, I was not supposed to be here to see it. I crept along the trees, careful to stay hidden as they marched towards the altar. This explained why the trail got so wide here. If these people had been doing this for a while, it would have trampled down the grass. I watched as they walked and tried to notice anything other than their cloaks. I didn't see anything that could identify them at all. Not a thing. But something I noticed was that when they walked through the wet mud, they didn't leave a footprint. When they were about 10 feet from the altar, they stopped and got real quiet. The lead figure took 2 steps forward and turned to face the rest. As they did, they bowed in silent reverence. They held the box high above their head and said something in that odd language. The assembled others spoke back in a strange call and response. He did this 3 more times before turning his back to them and striding to the altar. My legs were twitching to run, but I was so deathly afraid of being caught that I stayed put. I couldn't help but watch. It was almost like I was in a trance. But that was quickly broken when the leader of the gang knelt and opened the little box. I still have no idea what the heck happened, and any attempt to understand it leaves me asking more questions. Questions I will never have answers to. The figure placed the box on the ground in the middle of the polished rocks and opened it. That was the moment I knew I had to get out while the getting was good. As soon as they had cracked the box, a bright light shot up into the sky, and a dense fog started emanating from the tiny box. Within seconds, it had engulfed the entire group and was heading my way. The sky had begun to darken too. That was enough for me. My legs finally bested my brains, and I took off in a sprint. I know I made noise and I heard some of the figures yelling in my direction in their language, but I was not sticking around to translate. I was barreling down the trail and crashing through the woods. I swear that I heard a roar as I broke through the path that led me to where I had been. I dashed down the trail until I saw the original 3 twisted pines. I raced through them, and as I did, the sky brightened back up. I was gasping for breath, but I kept going. I ran through the woods until I saw the embankment where my car was parked. As I ran to my door, I noticed someone had slashed my front tires. I didn't care. I was getting the heck out of there. I unlocked my door, cranked the ignition, and drove my hotwood car to the nearest gas station. As I drove away, I looked into my rearview mirror and saw one of the figures walk through the twisted pines. They watched me drive away, with my tire slowly shredding. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and flattened the pedal. I knew that it was dangerous to drive on a flat and would probably be a costly repair, but I didn't care. My lizard brain was the only part of me working at that moment, and I just needed to get the heck away. When I got to the gas station, I remembered that my app was tracking my movements. I was curious, so I opened the app expecting to see a single line in and a single line out. But what I saw was crazy. The line started from the side of the road, but once I got to the twisted pines, it looked like I just ran around in circles for hours before the line back out to my car. It's never done that before, nor has it since. Hours later, when I finally got home, I decided to find the posting that had suggested the trail in the first place and found that it had been deleted. I wrote a thread asking if anyone remembered seeing it or had, for some reason, taken a screenshot of the posting, but no one knew what I was talking about. It was like I was the only person who saw the posting. I paused my solo hiking for a bit and have stuck with well-known trails for the time being. I'd become hyper aware of what's going on around me at all times. I'd rather not find myself in that situation ever again. What's strange though is that I've seen these twisted pine tree archways a few other places. I think my brain is attuned to finding them now. Kind of like when you hear a word for the first time and then start noticing it everywhere. When I walk by them though, I feel a chill drape my body like a cloak. I like to think of it as a warning, but I fear it might be a way of inviting me back in. It seems to trigger a part of my brain that, for a fleeting second, contemplates walking through the trees. I stop myself every time before I even take a step, but the idea that I even consider it scares me. Sometimes when it's really quiet out on a trail, I hear what sounds like chanting coming from the trees and I feel my blood freeze. Are they following me or recruiting me? That's usually when I call it a day and sprint back to my car.